If you haven't already come to this awareness, there's a change in our schedule. Typically, the first Sunday of the month is our Sunday for Reverend Bonnie to speak. But due to some circumstances that are too long to explain, we've made a switch. And so Ron Zaharsky, who is going to be the speaker next week, is actually our speaker this morning, and Reverend Bonnie will be our speaker next week. So I need to introduce Ron. Most of you know him already and know that he has a background in this center. At one time he was actually board president, has studied religious science, and now he's really delving very deeply into Buddhist studies. And so as of next week, I guess, will you have a different title? No. But he will be officially on the track for priesthood in the Buddhist realm. So the reason that he's speaking this morning is because we do embrace all paths to God. And in fact, the science of mind philosophy has many of its roots in Buddhism, so I think we have a lot to share. Please help me welcome Ron Zaharsky.
Okay. Hi. Let me get my notes here. I'd like to say my talk is just to encourage you in your practice and to share our mutual appreciation for practice. That's pretty much it. I'm not trying to convince you of anything. I'm not trying to convert you to Zen Buddhism. I'm not trying to sell you something or book or anything. In fact, that's pretty much the summary of my talk, to encourage you in your practice. Now to something completely different. I really like music. I have a passion for music. And Cheryl and I just returned yesterday from Dallas. We went to hear Willie Nelson at the Willie Nelson 4th of July celebration. It was quite amazing. And most of all, though, I really like piano playing. And the day after that Willie Nelson recital, we heard Leon Russell, very awesome. But there was a review in the Dallas paper about the Willie Nelson band. And they wrote this: thankfully, his piano-playing sister, Bobby Nelson, and harmonica player Mickey Raphael helped right the ship with their usual dazzling solos. So Cheryl and I were talking afterwards, and would you consider Bobby Nelson's solo dazzling? Not dazzling, adequate. So what I think is Mary Lynn Brown is really dazzling. She's an awesome piano player. And my goal is to learn to play piano like Mary Lynn Brown. I've never touched a piano before, and I have this simple plan. I think I can make just one change in my life and then become a piano player. And that change is this, that I'm going to come here every Sunday and listen to Mary Lynn play. That's pretty much it. That's my plan. I might go to some recitals at the university, some piano recitals, but mostly I'm going to listen to her. And after a month or two of listening, I think that should be adequate. I'll buy a piano. I'll just sit down and play. Does that sound like a good plan to people? No. That's not going to, people think that's not going to work. And I think the problem is, I know what the problem is, it's just that it seems like for my new hobby, I'm not spending really enough time on it. So Mary Lynn, how much time do you say you play on an average Sunday?
On a Sunday?
Uh-huh.
Like being here?
Yeah.
Gosh, probably just about 15 minutes.
15 minutes. So yeah, that doesn't sound like enough time after a couple months to learn to play. So what I think I'll do is augment that. I think I'll augment it. I'll devote much more time. I'm going to devote 5 hours a week. That seems like an awful lot. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read about piano playing. So I'm going to spend 5 hours reading. I got some material here. I got this keyboard magazine, play more parts at the same time. That seems really pretty useful to do. I have this Art of Piano Playing book, this Abby Whiteside on piano playing, Indispensables of Piano Playing. So I'm going to spend 5 hours reading these books. Here's just an example. For the glissando, there is no question about this relationship of the top arm to the level where tone is produced. If the fingers, hand, or forearm have any bearing down on their own initiative, the glissando simply does not come off. They each become an integrated unit with the top arm control. They make the top arm effective in contacting tone. I have no clue what really that means, but it sounds really important to me. So I'm going to read these books over and over and over again. I'm going to memorize them. So after service, I can go to Mary Lynn Brown and say, hey, Mary Ann, for the the glissando, there's no question about the relationship of the top arm to the level where tone is produced. If the fingers, wrist, and forearm have any bearing down on their own initiative, the glissando just doesn't come off. So I can have some really good piano-type conversations with Mary Lynn, 5 hours a week of reading. How long do you think it'll take me to become proficient? That sounds like a lot, though, 5 hours. What's missing? Practice. So practice is the key, right? Without practice, and lots of it, I'll never become a piano player. And I think the same is true of spirituality, right? Just going to Sunday service will not make us a spiritual person, unless by spiritual person we mean someone like the spiritual equivalent of someone who goes to piano recitals, a spiritual aficionado. And reading books about spirituality, here I have one, The Compass of Zen, looks important, has a picture of Buddha on the cover and is black, pretty Zen-like. So, and he offers suggestions. Let me read some good ones. Do not become attached to any thoughts that arise in the mind. That sounds pretty good advice. I'm going to memorize that. Don't become attached to any thoughts that arise in the mind. Got that. And he has some pointers for meditation. He defines common people's meditation, means any kind of meditation practice that is used to improve your performance in some activity. He has this Hinayana meditation. It's the most popular meditation, sometimes called Vipassana or insight meditation. Helps students have insight into impurity, into impermanence, things along those lines. So I can read all that, learn it, but that's not going to lead me to becoming a spiritual person if I just do that. So even reading 40 hours a week and going to services won't turn you into a spiritual person. It'll just make you really, really good at talking about spirituality, right? So you can get together with your other friends who like to talk about spirituality and really have a good time, right? The key to spirituality, at least I think, is practice, just like the key to playing piano is practice. Now you might be thinking, hey, I practice, I go to Sunday service, I read books, and then I apply all this stuff to everyday life, right? So 24/7, I'm practicing this stuff that I read about. But I think that's kind of the spiritual equivalent. Let me grab my books here. I'm getting down in them. It's the spiritual equivalent of listening to Mary Lynn play and then just grabbing this book, foyer, kind of crack open a page, there's a page, and just start playing, right? It just seems complex or an arbitrary another moment of my day. So I think really life is sort of like that. It's so complex, things are happening, chaotic, and you just can't switch from listening to Mary Lynn play for a couple times and then practicing it randomly in this book. And I think the same can be said of spirituality. So I've gone to participate in a lot of meditation retreats. I kind of know how to sit on a cushion and meditate in a meditation hall. But I live next to a really great national park when I'm in Virginia, the Fredericksburg National Military Park, where I go walk my dogs in the woods. It's a very pleasant place. And one day after a meditation retreat, I thought, wow, I'm walking my dogs, having all these other thoughts, and all of a sudden it hits me, this would be a great place to practice mindfulness. Right, so I thought I'd give it a shot, but the dogs are dogs, and they're smelling and yanking me this way and yanking me that way, and I'm starting to think about my dogs and how they're not behaving, and what a big problem this is, and how I have to, after I walk, I have a lot of work to do, kind of catch up on my work. So it really doesn't work. Such a nice place, but kind of life, all these thoughts were interfering with it. Or you read a lot in mindfulness books about practicing washing the dishes. So one day I'm washing my dishes, having all these thoughts, I need to do this, I need to do that, not really paying attention to the dishes. I think, oh, I know, I'll be mindful. And it's really hard to just yank your mind from all your thoughts and all of a sudden place yourself in mindfulness. So I'm not really a big believer in this instant transference of reading to like instantly be able to do it in your life. Buddhists, or as my teacher likes to say, followers of the Buddha way, often call themselves Buddhist practitioners. And I like that term, practitioner. I think it's useful to consider yourself a practitioner of spiritual living. I practice spiritual living. And by practice spiritual living, we know it's not going to Sunday service solely or solely reading, but it's practice as I'm about to define it. There's a famous story about Wan Ying, the sixth patriarch of Chan Buddhism in China. One day a nun came to him and said, I don't understand this one sutra. Can you please explain it to me? And she hands Wan Ying this scroll of the sutra. And Wan Ying says, I'm illiterate. Can you please read the characters to me and I'll see if I can help you with it. And this nun says, what, you can't read? How can you help anyone? How can you possibly understand anything? And Wan Ying says, truth has nothing to do with words. Truth can be likened to the bright moon in the sky. Words in this case can be likened to a finger. The finger can point to the moon's location. However, the finger is not the moon. To look at the moon, it's necessary to gaze beyond the finger, right? So this saying, do not confuse the finger for the moon, is a really famous one in Buddhism, right? Do not confuse going to Sunday service, reading books, for having the direct experience, the real thing. So you might understand all sorts of things about religious science. You might have this intellectual understanding that everything's connected in this infinite intelligence, and that we as humans can kind of tap into that intelligence. Or you might intellectually understand the law of cause and effect. I, as a Buddhist, might have this intellectual understanding of impermanence, of anatman, or no self, things along those lines. And we may even have these aha moments that we read things in books, don't quite understand them, hear a talk, and all of a sudden, aha, it makes sense to me. But that aha, that it makes sense to me, is just a better description, a better focus of the finger. It's not the real thing. So understanding cause and effect is different than having a direct experience of cause and effect, right? The understanding is just a finger. So Ernest Holmes says that religious science is not based on any authority of established beliefs, but rather on what it can accomplish for the people who practice it. He says the word practice. So it's not the aha of the book Science of Mind. It's not the aha of a brilliant lecture by Michael Beckwith. It's the aha of practice. Don't get me wrong, I think fingers are important. Every week I meet with my teacher in a very formal meeting called a Dokusan, and lately we've been going through chapter by chapter this book, the Diamond Sutra. It's a seminal work of Mahayana Buddhism, and for you trivia buffs, it's the oldest known printed book in the world, the Diamond Sutra. And it's a tough book to go through. Let me, Red Pine, the translator of this book, of this version, says this: the Diamond Sutra may look like a book, but it's really the body of the Buddha. It's also your body, my body, all possible bodies. But it's a body with nothing inside and nothing outside. It doesn't exist in space or time, nor is it a construct of the mind. It's no mind. And yet, because it's no mind, it has room for compassion. So kind of a difficult thing to figure out, really, and it really, though, helps to work on this book to kind of be that finger, to be that pointer to some direct experience. So it makes most sense in thinking about piano playing. So if you go to a lesson, they give you pointers, and those pointers are really, really useful, but we never confuse them for the real thing of piano playing, right? So it's not that pointers aren't useful, but we don't confuse them for the direct experience. So I think I've hammered that point home enough, that practice is really, really important. And in a lot of Buddhist texts, the word practice comes up all the time. So there's this Heart Sutra, which we chant twice at every service, and it starts this way: when Kannon, the Bodhisattva of compassion, was practicing the deepest wisdom, he clearly saw that the five aggregates are empty, thus transcending distress and suffering. So how did he transcend suffering? By practicing. So that's the key. So maybe I start taking lessons from Mary Lynn, and she says you should really practice some scales. People have experience practicing scales. So I've kind of found them. So I'm committed to practicing 5 hours a day, but I find scale practice kind of boring. But I learned that I can daydream and practice scales at the same time. So if someone's listening from the other room, it sounds like I'm practicing, but really my mind's off somewhere else. Or maybe I've learned that I can kind of watch TV shows on my laptop while practicing scales. So really not very intense, focused practicing. It's sort of like half-hearted practicing. And it's the same with spirituality. So in Zen Buddhism, we meditate facing a wall. In Shambhala Buddhism, we meditate on cushions, but kind of facing each other in rows, just like you're sitting now. And it's really easy to be distracted. So a person is sitting there kind of in front of you and is fidgeting, and you can say, that person's fidgeting, I can't concentrate. Why is that person fidgeting? He's just annoying everyone. And you can create this whole big story about that person. Or look at that person's back and say, wow, that person's really attractive, and kind of weave this whole story about that person. So it's easy not to put the effort in of practice. But we know practice is hard work. It's not something that just comes effortlessly for people, right? We can imagine a classical piano player working hours and hours and hours memorizing a piece, and then you'd think they'd be done, but they spend hours, hours, and hours more crafting that piece. So they look at an 8-note section and think, I want it to look this way, I want it to sound like it's singing, and then fade away at the end, and then they practice those 8 notes over, and over again. So neuroscientists when they investigate how excellence occurs, how people become excellent in things like piano playing, painting, swimming, they learn that the key really is deliberative practice. Not just doing the same things over and over again, but challenging yourself with a task that's just a little bit beyond your current level of ability, trying it, evaluating your performance, either while you're doing it or immediately after, and then correcting your mistakes, and then repeat and repeat. So just not blindlessly doing the same thing over and over, but challenging yourself to a little bit beyond. And these researchers have shown that it takes about 10,000 hours to become expert at something. So while Mozart was a child prodigy at age 4, it took him 13 years to really be able to write world-class music. Or in another genre, the Beatles just appeared to kind of blast onto the scene with this series of #1 hits and an appearance in 1964 on the Ed Sullivan Show. But really, years before that, starting in 1957, they played hours and hours and hours in small clubs in Liverpool and Hamburg. And it wasn't until 1967 that they really had critical acclaim with the album Sgt. Pepper. So even experts, though, spend hours and hours and hours practicing. The famous jazz pianist Hiromi says this: "It requires a lot of rehearsal to play songs. My band always tells me I better change the group's name from Sonic Bloom to Boot Camp." And she says, "What I learned from Ahmed Jamal is the following: never be satisfied with where you are at, and have the attitude of trying to explore something new always. Focus," she says, "continuous training, and love and passion for what you do. More you practice, more you can fly." She says, "I wanted to bring what Jackie Chan does to Kung Fu to what I do on the piano." We can kind of imagine that. Jackie Chan looks so effortless in what he does in these movies, but we know that he spent hours and hours and hours from years and years and years perfecting it, so it does look effortlessly. Let me just grab a water here, sorry. So Zen Buddhism is based on cause and effect, and science of mind is based on cause and effect. Some fiery bolt enlightenment from the sky is without cause. It's wishful thinking, and thinking about enlightenment only hinders us. Zen is about action, and science of mind is about action. We have an expert piano player here, and we can ask her about her direct experience about piano playing. So, Mary Lynn, how did you acquire your piano playing skills? I'm going to guess now. I think you were a little kid playing with some toys, and this fiery bolt comes from the sky, hits you, and all of a sudden, whoa, you know, I'm a piano player, and you race to the piano and able to play Brahms flawlessly and without effort. And your parents were like, "What? Was that how it happened?" Or pretty much. All right. Well, as much practice. So it all makes sense to us, right, in the music sphere, right? It makes sense to us that how to become a musician, deliberative practice. And I think it's the same with spirituality. How do you become a spiritual person? Deliberative practice. It's easy to see what deliberative practice would be for a musician, but what would that look like for a practitioner of spiritual living? Now, I'm not an expert in science of mind, so I asked Cheryl, and she said, well, you need to practice meditation. And in fact, Holmes in the Science of Mind book says, any practitioner should take a certain time every day to meditate within himself. And Cheryl also suggested spiritual mind treatments and affirmations. For a Zen Buddhist, practice means sitting in meditation and living a simple life. And sitting in meditation, we do something called shikantaza. So shi means tranquil, kan means awareness, being totally aware, ta means hitting the right spot, kind of being exactly there, and za means sitting. So shikantaza means tranquilly aware of your current moment while you're sitting. That's kind of the goal of meditation in Zen Buddhism. Leading the simple life means putting ourselves wholeheartedly into whatever we do each moment. Putting our whole power into each moment. So when we're eating, put our whole power, our total awareness into that. When we're washing the dishes, put our whole awareness into that. When Cheryl's talking to me, I should put my whole awareness on her rather than some sort of partial attention while kind of listening to her while surfing the web or watching TV or whatever I do. Right? That's sort of living the simple life. And I mentioned a bit ago that it's impossible to just instruct you, please put yourself wholeheartedly into whatever we do each moment, and then zap, you do it, right? So each moment of the day, you're totally aware. That's not going to happen. That's sort of wishful thinking. So what is this deliberative practice that we can do that might lead us in that direction? A year ago, I gave a talk here, and I talked about one of my deliberative practices. I'm a teacher, and part of that, my responsibilities as a teacher is to hold office hours. And one thing about office hours is hardly anyone shows up. So I often see that as time to do my stuff, to do my research or something. And then when a student shows up, it's easy to see that person as an interruption, right, and not give that person total attention. So what I do is with my deliberative practice is the person comes in, I pause, I think just quickly, may that person be happy and free from suffering, and then engage that person. So it helps me kind of move me over and focus on that person. So a person further along on the path, a person more enlightened, wouldn't need that practice. They'd be there kind of in the moment more than I am, but that's where I am. It's just a task that's a little bit beyond my current level of ability where I can do some practice work. And here's a confession. Up until about 3 weeks ago, I was really much more of a reader than I was a practitioner. So I spent maybe a half hour a day meditating. That was good. But all the other things were the kind of go to service a couple times a week, read a whole slew, meet with my teacher. So on the moon finger continuum, my moon activities were down here in terms of hours, and my finger stuff was kind of up here. So then I was preparing for the talk and realized I'm really not walking the walk of what I'm trying to emphasize, practice. So I thought I'd try an experiment and kind of up the moon activity. So now I've been meditating for the last few weeks for an hour or two a day, and I've been doing various mindfulness practices, like 10-minute chunks of things. So mindfully walking around the yard, so not with dogs, not in a beautiful forest, but in something I can really concentrate on, trying to be in that moment while I'm walking and be aware. And that's been really helpful. Another thing I've been doing is doing 10 minutes of other mindfulness practice. So one day I might mindfully wash the dishes. The one that didn't work before, I mentioned washing the dishes, was my goal was to wash those dishes, and one thought out of many was to do mindfulness practice. Now it's my goal for today is to do 10 minutes of mindfulness practice, and how I'm going to do that today is washing the dishes. So it doesn't really matter if I got all the dishes clean. It's, can I concentrate enough and focus and work wholeheartedly on those dishes? And these simple practices, again, people further along the path wouldn't need to do them, right? They'd be able to do it just effortlessly beyond the spot. But these simple practices, for me, have had an effect in everyday life. So a few weeks ago, I was on a motorcycle trip to the Four Corners with my son. And when you think motorcycle trip, you might think really cool Harley Davidsons, but it was just kind of dirt bikes on dirt road, Forest Service roads, really. And we're at the start of the trip, going the back way to Hatch on Valley, and there was some farm machinery in the road and some trucks, and sometimes going 30, 35 miles an hour, and I'm thinking, great, this is at perfect speed, I can look around, I'm out here with my son, I'm having a great experience. On the way back, 5 days later, Hatch to Las Cruces on Valley, farm machinery in the road, trucks on the road, 30, 35 miles an hour, and I'm thinking, it's hot out, and I'm thinking, man, why is everyone going so slow? I really would like to hurry it up and get home, and it's hot out, and just kind of getting a little aggravated. And then it kind of hit me that the direct experience was the same. Valley, farm machinery, trucks, 30, 35 miles an hour, all that's the same. But my interpretation was at one point, this is wonderful and great, and the other time is like, this is so aggravating, I just can't take it. I want to kind of go faster, right? So speed, slow, that's not part of direct experience. That's just my interpretation. And I was able to kind of quickly get back into just enjoying the experience with my son. So deliberative practice really kind of pays off, I think. And I'm not going to suggest that you do the same thing I'm doing, meditate for 2 hours, do zombie walking around your yard. It's just to encourage you, it's an example to encourage you in doing whatever practice you're doing. Now, a bit ago, I mentioned that researchers say it takes about 10,000 hours to develop expertise in something. And I'm thinking, I practice 10 hours a week or whatever, I'd be 82 by the time I got kind of expert in spiritual living or got enlightened. And that's kind of a bummer. I might die the next day. I got enlightened and whoops, I'm dead. So that would be kind of sad. But there's some really good news in the piano playing community. Here's the secret. As long as you're doing deliberative practice, let's say there's a piano player and doing 5 to 10 hours a week of deliberative practice, you can call yourself, you're entitled to call yourself a piano player regardless of where you are on this path to expertise. Right, so as long as you're doing this deliberative practice, you can call yourself a piano player. You are a piano player. You feel like a piano player. You ooze piano. right? And your friends consider you a piano player. Let's say that was true about someone. A year ago they were playing and then something happened and they stopped. They had a kid. Their job got kind of intense and they had to give up piano. One of their parents got sick and they stopped playing piano, whatever. Now, a year of not playing piano, they're not entitled to call themselves a piano player, right? They've kind of lost that right. So it has everything to do with, are you currently practicing? Are you currently doing that deliberative practice? And it's the same thing with spirituality, I think. So in Buddhism, we say that if you meditate for a minute, your life is one with the Buddha for that minute. If you meditate for 10 minutes, your life is one with the Buddha for those 10 minutes. If you practice, whatever that practice is, you're expressing your innate goodness. Or to reflect on the theme for the month, you're already perfect, right? Perfection is your birthright. Practice makes you express that perfection, right? So if you're practicing, doing deliberative practice, expressing this innate goodness, you can call yourself a spiritual practitioner. It doesn't matter where you are on the path. The path, that's sort of irrelevant. Now, I may have a goal of playing piano. Let's say I get a teacher, I start practicing, and then life happens. You know, work's hard, I get home, I'm tired, I just grab something to eat and go sit in front of the TV and kind of zone out, and then I don't practice because it's hard work to practice. Or I have a goal of running the Marine Corps Marathon, and I sign all the forms to run it, and I start practicing, but then after a while you have to run these 15, 20-mile runs, and those are hard work, and I was planning to do them on Saturday, but I didn't get to bed that early on Friday, so I get up late on Saturday, and it's hot out, so it was just a bad idea, and I gave it up. And those don't really bother me, right? I sort of wanted to do piano, but life happened. Or I sort of wanted to run a marathon, but then life happened. So doing any of these requires a willingness to devote a large portion of your life to deliberative practice. So why would we do that for spirituality? What would motivate us to, change our life, to do practice? Well, I said a moment ago that meditating for 10 minutes makes us express our innate goodness for 10 minutes. But are we really satisfied with that? Is that what we want to do? Out of the 24 hours of a day, we're expressing our innate goodness for 10 minutes. It seems like we'd want more. And here's where I'll get on my soapbox. I think that if the goal is self-help, if the goal is, I want to relieve stress, I want to be happy, I don't want to be so depressed, that's kind of being a practitioner of self-help. In my mind, that's not a practitioner of being a spiritual person. A spiritual path is one that's beyond the self. So Anderson, Allen, and Whitehouse say that science of mind and other new thought communities may be the point at which religion, philosophy, and science come together as the most effective combination to move the world to greater peace, plenty, health, and harmony. So this goal of creating world peace and harmony, that's a goal beyond the self. The goal of Buddhism is to create an enlightened society beyond the self. So we're moving to these important goals, not hobby goals. Oh, I knit, play piano, and I'm creating an enlightened society. Right? These are goals that are really could change the world as we know it. But goals like this are really funny. Buddhists are really aware that if we focus on a goal, like creating an enlightened society, we start to lose focus on focusing on the goal of being present in the moment. Let me give you an example. So if we're practicing dana, or charity, and then one day we're at the gas station and a person walks up and says, "Can I have $1?" and you give them $1, and you're thinking, "I'm practicing charity." At least to a Buddhist, that's not practicing charity. You have this thought in mind, "Oh, I want to practice." Practice of real charity is a person comes up at the gas station, asks for $1, and you just give the $1 without thinking. So to a Buddhist, thinking about focusing on goals kind of defeats the purpose. You want to be living in the moment. So goals help us get to practice. Goals help us get to the cushion to meditate. But once we get there, the goal of practice is just to practice, right? Just like for an amateur musician, the goal to practicing piano is just to practice piano. I just want to have fun. I don't really have any highfalutin goals. At a Shambhala meditation retreat, the instructor said, "We promise nothing and we deliver." So that's sort of the goal of practice. So there, I've done it. I've spent 20, 25 minutes or so pointing at the moon. And my summary is this. I'm encouraging you to look no further than Mary Lynn Brown. She didn't gain her piano playing abilities by some sudden fiery bolt from the sky, zap, and she's a piano player. She didn't gain it from going to concerts and just listening. She didn't gain it from spending hours and hours and hours reading books, right? She gained it from practice. So please follow the Mary Lynn way. Thanks.
we normally would have a quick affirmative prayer, so let's give it a whirl. As we move back into that space on the cushion, so to speak, our moment to practice with no particular goal in mind except to recognize the all that is, and to feel our oneness with that expanse. I know that each of us, as we move along the path in our unique ways, all have at our disposal all that we need at the moment that we need it to help us with that next step, that stepping stone, that railing, that guiding hand, that finger. They're everywhere. And I give thanks for our increasing awareness. I give thanks for all the support, the tools, and the fingers that are in this place. And I know that each one of us is lifted, and as we are lifted, so our community evolves, and also the world. And I place these words into the law, knowing that all is well, even in this moment, as we evolve to our greater yet to be, and so it is.